Right, let's do some drafting. It's been way too long. So, oh yeah, I forgot they changed this. So the plan for today, I'm going to make as much, I'm going to go into as much detail about each pick as I can. A couple of people have asked me questions about, how to draft. I don't feel confident making picks. I don't feel confident building a deck. So, and I obviously recently published an article about this. So to kind of reinforce that, I'm going to go into as much depth as possible on every pick. Feel free, if anyone's watching, feel free to chime in the chat. Ask me more questions. I'll happily give as much information as I can. We'll just go proper deep on this, and then we'll play a few games afterwards. So, starting with this new selector general thing, which I assume is... Oh, they mentioned this being similar to Rift. So, I kind of like this as an idea, because it means you'll sometimes have people playing Kalias because they feel like playing Songhai. Although, I guess the worst three generals are still going to suffer to some extent. It kind of bigs up the people in the middle of the pack. For instance, I think most people are fans of Faye over Kara. I'm actually the other way around. I really like Kara, but she's less often seen from what I've heard. Possibly until recently. I think she might be catching on in general, but pick like this. If you think Vanar are the best faction, which they probably are, you might be drawn to Kara. I think it's pretty obviously between Kara and Varth. Casima's Bloodborne spell is quite good against River, who is like the best general, but she lacks synergy and can struggle with, Abyssians don't have great AoE. They have some good single target removal, but it's kind of awkward. Like Punish is conditional. Ritual Banishing is pretty bad for Cassava because you have to sacrifice actual creatures to it. So, and Dark Transformation is expensive. Whereas these guys have ludicrously efficient removal spells that also happen to transform, beating random Deathwish abilities. So, I think Cass loses out here. And Starhorn is pretty obviously inferior to Varth. Like, Varth's Bloodborne spell is one of the best in the game because it gives you a ton of card advantage, ton of pressure, and is basically a win condition in itself, similar to Warbird. Whereas Starhorn's pretty niche. Like, you have to have a deck with a very low curve to make him work properly. You have to be comfortable with drawing your opponent extra cards, either because you have some synergy for it, or because you're going to overwhelm them so quickly that you just win on mana. I think both of those things are very difficult to pull off in Gauntlet, whereas Varth is just, you smash face. Maybe you need to pick some healing. That synergizes pretty well with him, but other than that... so I think it's close between these two, and I think, personally, I would put them at roughly equivalent. I don't know if anyone has a preference, but I like playing Kara a lot, so I'd be tempted to start with her. I think Vanar are also a good showcase for some of the stuff I was talking about in my article. A lot of my examples referenced Vanar cards, whereas, excuse me a minute, Magmar have a bit less coherent synergy, whereas the Vesper theme is pretty interesting in Gauntlet. When do you go for it? How good is Glacier Elemental? That sort of thing. So I'm going to go for this. Right. Here are some medium cards. Hearthsister is pretty useful. I think positional tricks in general are quite powerful in Duelyst. Herself, as a 2-drop, she's not very exciting. Playing a 3-2 on turn 1 is usually suboptimal because it will die to your opponent's general, and getting it to trade with things can be a faff. But I think she's obviously a lot more impactful than these two. Flash Freeze is mostly a synergy card. Like, if you're super aggressive, really tempo-y, then it can be quite good. If you're going to draw a lot of cards and replace it, as in like fill up your hand to make up for the space that it leaves, then it's good. If you're playing Arcanists, then it's good, but right now we're doing none of those things. And I'm certainly not picking this over a powerful positional trick like Hearthsister. And that's Komodo Charger, which is not exactly well known for being a powerhouse. So I think in terms of utility, Half Sister allows me to deploy minions far away in a protected spot and then move them forward. She allows me to remove opponent's minions. It's it's a card that can kill Veil Hunter. That's very important. She can mess up my opponent's plans by breaking up an aggressive or a defensive formation by moving anything basically. Like this effect is just quite powerful. It does die to the opponent's general on a hit, but we can fix that with Kara's Bloodborne spell as well. So even though it doesn't look like we have the direct synergy that Faye has, where you can put things in Warbird range, we can make it into a 4/3, aka a real card. And all of a sudden that's a lot more tempo and pressure when you pull something big into position or push something out of position and drop a 4/3 next to your opponent. So I think Half Sister wins this pick pretty easily. Okay, Icy, Crystal Cloaker, and Rock Pulverizer. So either way, wherever we go with this pack, we're walking out with a 2-drop, and we've already got a 2-drop, which is a great start. This means we're going to have to spend a bit less effort prioritizing 2-drops throughout the draft. Normally, about halfway through, I start looking to make sure that I've got enough 2-drops in particular. Like, you always have to keep an eye on your curve, but 2-drops are the most important thing to make sure you can play your card on turn 1, not fall massively behind on board on that early stage. So of these, Icy is a battle pet, and battle pets in Gauntlet are very, very bad. Just sort of generally. Like, some of them make up for it by being powerful cards, like Grow, which has a lot of presence. But the words battle pet are a huge downside to a card. For instance, Yun, a 3-mana 5/4, not very good. The card is, hits like a ton of bricks, but it will never actually hit what you want it to hit. Because Gauntlet is so reliant on positioning. So a 2-mana 2/3 is obviously good, but the fact that it's a pet makes it awful. The opening Gambit is quite strong. I think, obviously, if you're playing anything that synergizes with stun, like Ice Shatter Gauntlet, you pick this because it triggers your Gauntlet, which is a powerful card. But we're not. And since that's a single rare, we're unlikely to get one. Certainly not worth taking taking a card like this at a speculative pick. Although the effect itself is, it's pretty good. Like, Frigid Corona is a great card. The fact that it has to be something that you can place the minion next to, which is, it's a non-zero downside. It makes positioning Icy in a positioning Icy somewhere where it will actually get a decent attack and also use its opening Gambit effectively pretty hard. So the card will probably just kill itself and worst, stop plowing into your opponent's Sojourner or something. I'm going to skip this guy for a minute. Rock Pulverizer, this card is sometimes okay. Like, locking down an opponent's thing for a couple of turns is quite powerful in a way. But you have to make up for it very quickly. Like, you have to buff the Rock Pulverizer, or you have to be really pressuring your opponent and not allowing them to run away with the Pulverizer. And again, that's quite difficult. Like, what if you draw this on turn 5 or 6? It does nothing, right? In most cases. So, although potentially slowing down an opponent's general for a couple of turns is handy, doing it with a minion that is so fragile, dies so easily, like, there's lots of board states where that slowing down doesn't work. Like, your opponent will just hit it with something else, kill it, etc. Or you won't be able to capitalize on it. Like, if slowing them down for 2 turns when you have an 8/8 nearby is great, but what if you don't? What if they remove the 8/8? What if they're ahead on board? This card does nothing. And it's not that great as a turn 1 play either. 1/4s on turn 1 are pretty bad. They don't line up well against 2/3s. Or even your opponent's general. Like, they die in 2 hits, which is good, but they only deal 2 damage on the way back, which is pretty bad. This guy, on the other hand, this card is awesome. I'm a big fan of Crystal Cloaker, partly because it's just a very, very efficient 2-drop. It's a 2/3 for 2. That's good. That's a baseline that we want to adhere to. So, like, ideally we want all of our 2-drops to either be 2/3s for 2 with a small upside, or powerful utility things like ranged units. Crystal Cloaker's upside makes it bigger, which is fantastic in Gauntlet. Anything that increases the size of creatures, generally really powerful, which is why I like Kara so much. Pushing Crystal Cloaker up to a 4-3 makes it really hard for your opponent to want to attack it twice to get rid of it. That's 8 damage they have to take if it's on their side of the board. That's tons. And it makes it eat other 2-drops, survive, and your opponent then takes 4 when they try and kill it with their face. So that's really powerful. On top of all that, it's a Vesper. And I really like Vespers. The Vesper synergy in Gauntlet is not too hard to assemble. There's a couple of good payoffs and a bunch of perfectly playable Vespers that you can use to set them up. And the more opportunity I have to be able to use an Iceblade Dryad or a Frostfire or something, the better. Turn 1 Crystal Cloaker, turn 2 Frostfires won me a lot of games. So this guy is a slam pick. Hailstone Prison, Swamp Entangler, Cryptographer. Man, we haven't had a card that costs more than 2 mana yet. This could be interesting. So, Hailstone Prison, like Flash Freeze, another super aggressive card. This card is very good when you're ahead on board, like far ahead. And if this was pick 22 or 23, and we had a full-on aggro deck, I'd happily slam this. I think that's great. As it is, early on, like you only have so much space in your deck for non-creatures, and Hailstone Prison doesn't really get a slot, I think, at this stage. Like, this could be an aspect of the Fox, this could be a Chromatic Cold, a Cryogenesis, a Frostfire, so on and so forth. I think the card is quite good, but I think, you know, we get to see another, quick maths, 81 cards in this draft. Like, chances are one of them will probably be a Hailstone Prison. We can grab one later if we want. Swamp Entangler is awful because, although, again, it can slow an opponent down for a couple of turns, that's literally all it can do. It can't kill anything. It can't trade with anything. And that's really bad. You're spending a whole card on no effect. It does have some positional value, but ultimately Duelyst is still a CCG. Just positioning will not win you games. You have to also make sure that you're able to capitalize on your positional advantage by deploying threats to the board, overwhelming your opponent, and pressuring them, and then killing them by hitting them in the face. Swamp Entangler does absolutely none of that. Cryptographer, I think, is really interesting. Kinetic Surge is a very powerful Bloodborne spell, and this guy could represent 3 +1/+1 damage, +1/+1 buffs on a big-ish turn, plus himself, plus his own 2/2 body. So we're looking at least, you know, played on the right turn, he's a 3/3, or he's a 2/2 on turn 1 if you're desperate, which is good. And then he can also buff something else along with himself. He also lets you Kinetic Surge on subsequent turns, which can be quite strong for just curving out with buffed minions. This is really good if you draw a hand that's slightly off curve, being able to fill in the gaps with Kinetic Surge, and basically cheat your minions up to the size they're supposed to be on that turn. So I think this is quite an interesting effect. Like the fact that it can make itself a 4/4, while also buffing a couple of other minions, that's really good in the late game. And in the early game, it lets you Kinetic Surge on turn 2 while deploying a 2-drop. That's great, right? I think this will be a really nice curve smoother with some useful late game potential. Alright, so we're looking for some bigger stuff now. Snow Rippler, Sun Elemental, Helm of Mechazor. So based on everything I've already said, right, I've mentioned I like Vespers, I like low curves, I like creatures which get value, which trade evenly. So this card is a pretty obvious pick, but let's go into why. Helm of Mechazor is too small, right? Although it's 1 mana, that's very efficient, it dies to a single hit from the enemy general. If you draw this anytime after turn 1, it's so embarrassing, right? That's just a replace. Now, you can afford to have a couple of cards in your deck that you always replace. Like sometimes you'll just get dud picks or really situational cards, and you'll be throwing them away always. But the more you have to do that, the worse all your replaces get. Like sometimes you'll be wanting to dig for something, but you're forced to just throw away this crap card instead of, you know, potentially leaving a decent card in your hand to set up for a play. Replacing can be used to smooth your curve, find synergy, hold on to cards that matter and sculpt a game plan around them, all sorts of things. If you're playing dead cards in your deck, all that kind of goes out the window. And the more you draw them, the worse they get. So although this is quite good we are playing Kara, like, We can go Cryptographer, Helm of Mechas, or Kinetic Surge. Like, that's potentially pretty spicy for a late game kind of flood of cards. But I'd much rather have a card that did something outside of that circumstance. And a card that will very rarely trade with anything of value and just dies to the opponent's general. Not really worth it. We're also highly unlikely to actually get the Mechas or squad together, which is, I guess, a minor consideration. I imagine someone somewhere has done it, but I'm not about to take that risk when we can just pick good cards instead. Sun Elemental. I'm not sure I've ever actually cast this card, but it has a big problem. It can't buff itself, I think. I assume. If it could buff itself, it'd actually be pretty strong, right? A 3/5 that buffs something else for 2 health. That's great. But the fact that this doesn't do anything unless you already have 2 minions on the board, and otherwise it's a 3/3 for 4, which is pretty bad, means that it's just kind of an unnecessary card. Like, cards that are only good when you're ahead, sometimes you want them because it's useful to have a card that takes a mild advantage into an overwhelming advantage. An example of that would be something like Soul Shatter Pact, where you have some stuff on board, you play Soul Shatter Pact, you kill your opponent. But that works because, like, the faction it's in is quite good at littering the board with random crap, and which requires a specific answer, aka an AoE, or a very large board presence from the opponent to smoothly deal with. We're not in that faction. We're playing Vanar. We're unlikely to have random crap sitting around. Even if we did, buffing its health probably isn't very exciting. So, this card, although sometimes, someone's probably gotten a massive Sun Elemental blowout, right? I have 2 3/3s, you have 2 3/3s, I play Sun Elemental, eat both your guys. Wow, that's amazing, right? But that's a fairly specific situation. And the card itself, it's a 3/3. You could play a 3/6 for 4 and have as much toughness, probably with text. Or a Hailstone Golem, right? It's kind of the same amount of stats, but it's not situational at all. It's just a big guy. So the fact that this card is really conditional makes me not want it, even if sometimes you'll get some extra tempo by allowing a creature to make a free attack. This card, on the other hand, so there's a concept in Magic the Gathering Limited called the vanilla test. And it's roughly this. If you ignore all the text on a card, is it still good? Right? Does it pass the test of a vanilla creature of the same size? Vanilla being no text. So, in Magic, it roughly works out that you want creatures that are the same power and toughness as their mana cost. So, like a 4/4 for 4 passes the vanilla test. A 3/3 for 3 passes the vanilla test. In practice, the sizes fluctuate a bit depending on which color you're in, which is like a faction, and what set you're in, and all sorts of things. But that's roughly what it comes down to. Duelyst has a pretty similar vanilla test, right? A 2 mana 2/3 is good, anything smaller is bad. On that note, Snow Rippler passes the vanilla test like a boss. 3 mana 3/4 is great body. It still dies to a 2-drop plus a general hit, but it doesn't die to a 2-drop 2/3 plus like a ping effect, like a Blood Tear or a Blistering Scorn. It doesn't die to a Varth with 1 overload on. It doesn't die to a 3/2 for 2 like a Hearth Sister or a Skyrock Golem. It doesn't die to some AoEs like Frostfire. And it's very buff friendly. If we give this +1/+1, it becomes a 4/5. That's huge. And 4/5 is where creatures start to get big in Duelyst, in my opinion. That's where they can properly dominate 2-drops. They usually require your opponent to attack them with 2 things. And they don't die to Plasma Storm. It's very important. So the fact that it's such a big buffable body, and also has text, right? It's a Vesper. That's amazing for the reasons we mentioned earlier. You can cast Frostfire on it for value. You can trigger Glacier Elemental. You can Iceblade Dryad. We're hoping to get at least one of these cards, maybe 2 during the draft. That's ideally, and like maybe 6 or 7 Vespers, because they're all good, right? And it has this ability that's mostly useless. Like, I think I've attacked with Snow Rippler for actual value like once, ever. And I used to play it in my old Kara deck back in the day, when she had her old ability quite a lot. I'd play it because it would be a 5/6. But it actually very rarely gets value. That's kind of okay, because a 3 mana 3/4 is awesome. A 3 mana 3/4 that 1 in 10 games draws an extra card, that's even better. Because you can replace the battle pet, it literally just draw a card, and that's fantastic. So that's an easy pick. I'm really happy with this draft so far. I know we're only 4 picks in, but this is great. Oh boy. 2 drops keep flowing. So we discussed Rock Pulverizer before. It's a low impact card. I failed to mention last time it does synergize with Kinetic Surge very well. A 2/5 provoke is not a bad size. 5 health is like enough to survive getting hit by small things. But this card is just not very exciting. Bloodletter. I like having maybe 1 6-drop in my deck. Maybe 2, depending on how it's going so far. Right now it looks like we're already playing quite a tempo-y deck, if the rest of our picks continue along these lines. So we'll probably only need 1. This thing is not only a 6-drop, which we do not need yet. I tend to look for them much later in the draft unless a legendary comes up. But it's bad. It's the size of a Hellstone Golem, unless a general is attacking it. If and only if a general is attacking it, it's like a Storm Metal Golem with worse toughness. Unless you buff it, which, whatever. I mean, yes, we're playing Kara, but yeah. Hello, Lazy Neon Panda. I don't know how long you've been watching, but I'm doing an in-depth breakdown of my draft picks to kind of follow up on my article from the other day. So we've got 2 pretty bad cards here. And then we've got a Veil Hunter. And I love Veil Hunter. This card is very, very good. So the reason ranged minions are great is because they can attack for free, right? If you can deal 1 damage to your opponent's minion, face, whatever, and not pay anything for that, your Veil Hunter doesn't get damaged in return, you've generated free value. Like, you've still got a 1/2 in this case, but you've still got a unit that's undamaged, and their minion is taking damage, or their general is taking damage. You do that repeatedly, you start to accrue a large amount of advantage. If you buff the Veil Hunter, you start accruing advantage at a faster rate. And it gets quickly overwhelming. We don't have any strong buffs yet. We just have the Bloodborne spell, so that's fine. That's a 2/3 ranged. Still good. Would play. That's a Widowmaker, right? Widowmaker's a solid card in Solemnheart Gauntlet. But even just playing this on turn 1 forces your opponent to respect it. You could at any point just drop a Songweaver or a Frostfire or something and insta-kill an enemy minion from far away. And your opponent has to respect that possibility. The downside, of course, is that it's a 1/2. If your opponent's pressuring you, it's very unlikely that you'll be able to stick it. The flip side of that is you can play this thing as defensively as you want, because it's okay being far away from the enemy. It likes that. It's got ranged. So it invites you to play it defensively. So you can just get away with that. You can just leave it on the back line, protect it as much as you can, let it do its thing, and hopefully win the game with it. And that's a lot of utility for a 2-drop. Lazy Neon Panda says, just had a bad day on Duelyst. Oh no, I'm sorry to hear that, dude. What happened? Okay, here we go. Here's the payoff. So I'll talk about Iceblade Dryad in a minute, but let's discuss the other 2 picks first to make sure I'm not missing anything. So this card has an understated body. If we're looking at the vanilla test that I mentioned a couple of picks ago, in Duelyst, for 5 mana you'd expect roughly like a 5/5 or a 5/6. There are only a few cards that are a 5/6. There's like Incinerer. To be honest, that might be it off the top of my head. There's Incinerer, there's Brightmoss Golem. Golems in Duelyst, I really like this. They sort of slightly more than pass the vanilla test to make up for having no text. So you'd expect a card with an actual ability to be smaller than a golem rather than start there and go up. But this card is well below that. It's a 4/3. That's pretty bad, right? You can get 3-drop 4/3s with upside too. Now it has quite a good upside, but a very situational one. If your opponent just has some decent sized creatures, like if their minions pass the vanilla test, this card does very little. You're spending an entire card on 5 mana. Maybe it trades with something, or maybe it just gets removed. But the effect is, relatively marginal. I don't value Dispel that highly in Gauntlet. And you spend an entire card on 5 mana on that. It's just not very exciting. Winterblade. This is not a massively good rate for an artifact. +2 attack for 4 mana. Like, you can get +2 attack for 2 mana. So it has to have some good upside, right? Damaging minions and stunning them, that's okay. But if you're hitting something that's big enough to survive a Winterblade, you're taking a lot of damage for, some utility. But I prefer to not have to hit minions that big anyway, because that very quickly leads to you falling behind. Like, I'd rather play a 4/6 and run away and let that deal 4 damage to the minion most of the time. Like, artifacts do have a benefit in that they're repeatable damage source. If you don't actually die, you can get a lot of card advantage out of your artifact, but I also prefer my artifacts to actually just kill stuff, because although the minion is stunned, I still have to attack it again next turn with something to kill it. So I'm still going to have to hit it again and take more damage, or hit it with a minion and have to trade anyway. So I think this card is just not very efficient for what it does. Like, the effect, it's a pretty good line of text. Like, people, I imagine, have played Winterblade and won the game as a result, but it's not really efficient enough to warrant taking it over this. This card is bonkers. So we do need Vespers. That's fine. We've got 2 already, and we can prioritize more during the draft. I want about 5 or 6, ideally more if I can take them, to make good use of this. The nice thing about Iceblood Dryad is as follows. Worst comes to worst, it's a 3/3 for 3, so it roughly passes the vanilla test. It's not a very exciting body, and I wouldn't want a 3/3 for 3 with no text in my deck, but, it's serviceable. It's a Vesper itself, so if you draw it and another Vesper synergy card, you're not completely out of luck. And its effect is absolutely awesome. For those not in the know, Songweaver used to be a 2/2 that gave a minion +1/+1 in flying. And they had to nerf it because it was so good. Because, you could just play, any faction could just play a minion far away, and then, bam, it was in your face and buffed and awful. It's a very powerful effect. So now it's limited to just Vespers, but you get a good body along with it. So you're getting a card that's worth a card, if you know what I mean. You're getting a minion that's not just going to die to a general hit. And you're getting this really powerful boost of tempo, because you can fly your Crystal Cloaker over and eat their ranged unit and leave yourself with a 5/2 or something as profit, and your opponents are like, what just happened? It's a very good way to win the game, or just swing a game.